Well, I think I can speak for both of us to say that we're thrilled to be here and look forward to our conversation today. So we have some information that we plan to share with you, but we also are very much interested in a conversation. One of the things that you'll hear about towards the end is that our research that we have a grant to do regarding this is about lived experiences. And so we're going to ask a few questions about your lived experiences today, but you certainly don't have to share extensively about that, but just to see what are the experiences in the room, what are the questions in the room, what kinds of things do you find engaging about this, or maybe ideas that you can generate based on things that you've experienced or heard about others experiencing. So we'll just start. Who's heard of the term technology-facilitated sexual violence? That's a 1.5. I think I got a 1.5.
I think we got 2.5.
2.5?
We might have 2.5.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. 2.5. Okay. Yeah. And then in part of our title as well, who's ever heard of the term cyber flashing?
Other than our title.
Other than our title, yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to start with a few questions. This first one, I'm not going to ask you to specify whether you were the sender or receiver. Okay. So raise your hand if you've ever sent or if you've ever received an unsolicited nude image in a text or through social media. Unsolicited means it's one that you didn't ask for somebody to send you. So if you've ever sent a message that the person didn't ask for, or you've received the image that you didn't ask for, and it was an image that contained some nudity, so it was explicit or sexually explicit or a naked image in a text or through social media or a dating platform. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's well over half.
I would say about 3/4 if I were guessing.
Okay, so raise your hand if, in addition, so for those of you who already raised your hand, you count for this. Raise your hand if you also know somebody else who's had that experience, who's either received one or sent one. Okay, so that's almost everybody in the room. All right. Do you want to make a little comment about some statistics? Or?
Yeah, and so, and to kind of take it to there's not a ton of research about this, which is why we got kind of excited about this topic. And it kind of came up, we laugh about some of the conversations that if people had been walking by our office at the right time, they would have heard some seriously interesting things that they might not have been expecting. Yeah. But with both of our GAs as well. So it was often a rousing conversation. Because so many people have had experiences with this, but yet there's not a lot of literature. There's not a lot of information about what actually is this stuff, what actually constitutes technology-facilitated sexual violence or cyber flashing versus what doesn't. And so we got really excited about that and had some really exciting conversations. So what the statistic that I have to offer you today is cyber sexual harassment. So that probably takes it like a little bit to the next level, as opposed to that's a terrible choice of words, but as opposed to the question we asked. And so 41% of women in one particular study, and like I said, there's not a lot of research out there about this, reported being experiencing cyber sexual harassment, and 22% of men. And so, we've got just asked you if you had ever received or sent an image. And we were, I would say, at 3/4. And when we asked if you knew somebody, we got close to 100%. So you think about the ever-presence, the what is the word I'm looking for? I have 2 children that make you dumb. Like how
pervasiveness.
Pervasive, thank you.
You're
this
welcome.
Is why there are 2 of us. The pervasiveness of this, but we're not really talking about it, and we're not talking about what is happening and the experiences of folks. So.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about the conversations that are happening around it, but those conversations are happening outside of the scholarly literature and in particular forums. What we are seeing is in criminal justice literature. So in criminal justice is where this is showing up, and what's happening is people are trying to figure out what should be prosecuted, and are there laws in place for this? And if people do try to bring court cases, do the laws support that or not? And do new laws need to be formed? And how all of this is still widely outside of the criminal justice system. And so a lot of the conversations that are taking place have to do with that aspect of it, with actually introducing this as something that has a criminal component, recognizing that for as long as we've had the internet, we've had harassment, including sexual harassment, that's largely experienced by women, perpetrated by men. But of course, that's on a binary. And so the literature hasn't even really done a good job of including identities outside of this gender binary in our research. So the research is not very good, and certainly is just kind of getting started in criminal justice. But in our field, in counseling and social work and psychology, in those mental health fields, there's really nothing happening in the conversation. And so we really wanted to make sure that this conversation does start in a way that really takes a good look at starting from the beginning of what are the lived experiences around that, because it's going to differ. There's going to be a lot of different ways people might react to this and have thoughts about it. And so we want to take a look at that. Before we go any further, were there any specific questions? So we've got a pretty big group. So does anybody have a specific question that you were really hoping, or something that was a particular interest that drew you here today? Something that you were hoping we would talk about or answer for you?
You could hear a pin dropping
here. It's okay. I'm going to wait just a little longer for those of you who are debating whether or not you want to speak up, because sometimes it can feel intimidating to speak up in a group like this. Mm-hmm. So any questions or topics that was a particular, like, this is something I really was curious about? Yeah.
Are there resources, if this happens to someone, are there resources on campus that can sort of navigate and help guide you through what to do?
Mm-hmm. Okay, resources. So that's a great question. So to answer directly now, and then maybe coming back to this a bit, specific resources would be that if you have a distressing experience, then reach out to the counseling center here. And the Oasis program and the counseling center is also an excellent resource. So certainly, whatever your personal experience is, if it's confusing to you, distressing to you, if you're trying to make sense of it, all of these things are legit and valid. And if you're having conversations with friends and you're not really feeling like you are getting what you need, the support or the perspective that you need from your friends who are maybe like, that's no big deal, or just shake it off, and it doesn't feel like something to shake off, then definitely seek out, this is totally legit to reach out to a counselor and have a conversation or multiple conversations about, for sure. And especially, something that we want to consider in all of this too, this is going to be like longer down the road, I think, but if you've experienced assaults or sexual violence in other capacities, and then you experience it through these digital forms, then that also can be triggering and kind of compile and exacerbate past traumas that you've experienced. And so something that might seem like a little thing or a joke can really touch on painful experiences, and it can definitely be deeper and more significant and have a bigger impact. So it's not something that I think either of us would say we wouldn't take it lightly. But again, that's everybody's lived experience is different.
And I want to add to what Dr. Milner was sharing, because I think the piece that speaks to me, and also I'm speaking, I'll let her tell me if I'm wrong, but is the kind of, we're both into advocacy and social justice, and the advocacy piece to me, and this is huge, because if we have a culture and a social context that says, just deal with this is just normal, like, but you're not experiencing that way, then you don't feel safe getting help or support. And so the piece too that I think is, that I get really excited about this too is to educate folks and say, hey, no, like this, if someone walked past you on the street and flashed you, like you would call the police. And so how is that different, and why is that not okay? And this somehow is something that you're just supposed to deal with. And there is some research about a little bit of folks' experiences where often the women, I believe it's women and describing their experiences as kind of being like, well, I'm just kind of unlucky. You know, I didn't like it, you know, whatever, but yeah, I'm just unlucky. You know, and so the idea being that if that's the message that you're getting from friends and the social context and media and the news and all of those things, then how do you find where you fit if it actually was something that was triggering for you or was upsetting to you on any level? And so that piece too, I think, is really something that is engaging for us in this, because we want to be able to advocate and say, no, like we need to shift the cultural dialogue on this about this is, but we don't know, we don't understand how people are even experiencing it, so we don't even know enough to start that.
Yeah, and so in a moment here, I think what we'll, how are we doing on time? So we'll provide some more information, some examples, and all of that, and then talk about, maybe generate some ideas about why you think some of these things are happening, why you maybe think people send unsolicited message, what people experience when they receive those messages. So I'm planting some seeds so you can share your ideas about that in a moment. But really coming back to this idea that all of the information that's out there right now is speculative. So there are these online forums where people are talking about experiences that they've had. And how many of you have heard the term dick pics? Yeah? Okay, so
you said it first.
I said it first.
Oh.
So
I asked her earlier if I was allowed to say that today.
So there are all these online forums about people talking about that. That's the nomenclature, right? Like that's how people refer to this often, even though the images are not just of male genitalia. That there's also a lot of different varieties, and you know, humans are creative. Give a shout out to human creativity. But so they're referred to as dick pics, and a lot of the forums are about women, so mostly female identified folks expressing the experiences they've had around this and kind of doing this counterpublic. It's called a counterpublic, where they're coming in and they're maybe doing shaming. They're shaming the people who have sent them. They're attaching the image with the name and kind of like trying to reclaim some power or talk about the negative experiences. And yet there's actually not research that goes in and looks at a variety of different types of people and their identities, a variety of different type of identities. So because you think this is also going to differ, your experience around this is probably going to differ based on your various identities and the subculture that you identify with and belong to, including like your age, racial and ethnic identity, LGBTQ, all these different identities that we hold, and the lived experiences around it might be very different based on what your subculture says about these, where it's acceptable and affirmed and where it's not. And so like getting back to what you were saying a moment before, that if there are women, like one experience could be that if women say, oh, well, I'm just unlucky, or this is something that just happens to women, could that be connected to an experience of internalized sexism? That women are so used to harassment in various forms that it becomes hard to recognize it when it's happening. It becomes hard to recognize, or because if women are so used to gender-based microaggressions, that those get rationalized away, or there's multiple ways of looking at it. And so women are used to maybe saying, oh, well, that's just something that happens, or I'm unlucky, or it was my fault, or whatever, and having this experience of an internalized sexism that's maybe informing how they're reacting or relating to that image. So all of these are conversations that that we hope to have with people in terms of understanding this a little bit deeper. But I realized just now, real quick, that we asked how many people have heard technology facilitates sexual violence, and we haven't given a definition of it yet.
I know, and I turned to the page where I have it written down.
So why don't
Would
you
like
do
me
that
to
for
do
us?
that?
Yes.
Okay, and then I have an example of what you were exactly just talking about.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is attributed to Powell and Henry, and I'm reading because I cannot be trusted to remember exactly. Define technology-facilitated sexual violence, or TFSV, if that's a mouthful to get out, is use of mobile and online technologies, okay, apparently I can't even say technologies, as tools to blackmail, control, coerce, harass, humiliate, objectify, or violate another person. And so you even think about that, so much of that is in the experience of the person. And I wanted to jump back on what Dr. Milner was saying just quickly, and then shift back and forth. We wanted this to be more like a conversation, so here it is. But when we first posted our study ad to Facebook, a very good friend of mine who is on faculty at Northern Illinois called me and left me a message, and he identifies as cisgender gay man. Okay, so he says, "You're taking credit. Like, this is, what are you talking about? This is from my dating days. And we were sitting after we taught, and we would go out and we would have a drink, and, you know, and this is from my dating experience." Mm-hmm. And for him, like, and he was totally joking, like he was just giving me a hard time. He's like, "You know, that was from all the stuff that was on my phone." And for him, it's not like, that was just part of his dating experience and part of what for him defines the culture of dating as a gay man. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's a completely different experience that I would have as a heterosexual cisgender female. And so I think just to kind of piggyback, like he and I would have very different experiences. He's now married, so he might have a different experience if he got a dick pic now. But it's just there's we don't understand anyone's experience, whether it's empowering, disempowering, offensive, not offensive. We don't know, and so that's a really good illustration too, because getting that phone call and listening to that message, and just having a laugh about it. But we just don't know, and different identities will affect your experience, and different experiences will affect your experiences, like Dr. Milner was saying about if you've experienced sexual assault. In any capacity, this might be something that's way more triggering for you. So anyway.
Yeah, so you shared the definition, and that's a broad definition, right? So that's technology-facilitated sexual violence, which is like this umbrella term for a lot of different behaviors. So something that I reflect on from time to time is how humans, for me personally, humans can be the absolute best thing and the absolute worst thing, depending on the human. And so in doing some of this research and reading about some of the ways this technology-facilitated sexual violence was enacted, unfortunately, we read a lot of stuff about some of the worst. And so this has been throughout time, right? So this isn't a recent phenomenon. So one of the things that I learned about that I didn't know about was in the 70s and 80s, Hustler magazine. Does everybody know what Hustler magazine is, right? So Hustler magazine had a regular column called Beaver Hunt. And the purpose of it was people would snap images of beaver, if we know what beaver is. So they'd snap images of naked women's genitalia, and they'd submit it to the magazine. And often what ended up happening is that the idea of the beaver hunt was that it was kind of done on the stealth or on the sly, so that what was happening is that images were being taken without women's consent or permission and then submitted to the magazine. And even the submissions would even include information about the person's name and a description of maybe who, like, oh, would you want to know that this person is an educator, this person's that, and that magazine faced criminal charges for this. And so that's an example of technology-facilitated sexual violence happening in the 70s and 80s. And then ever since the emergence of the internet, there's been online harassment, including online sexual harassment. And it spans also things like, so that it might show up in trolling behavior. There also have been things like ads on Craigslist that post saying, this person that I know has a rape fantasy. And at this time and day, they want this someone to come into the house and assault them. And those have actually taken place. That then people respond to that and go on and have sexually assaulted somebody based on somebody who was like maybe trying to get back at somebody else or had an agenda out. Maybe you've also heard of revenge pornography. So if somebody has made a consensual video of intimate sexual activity, and then there's a breakup, and then one person in the breakup will post publicly the porn video, although there's some really good philosophical discussions about why it should not be called revenge pornography, because it's not actually porn. But they're posting these videos of what was a consensual sex act, but now posting it without consent to get back at or to get revenge at somebody else. And there are massive repercussions around all of this. So those are the kinds of things, especially in criminal law, that are getting a lot of attention for understandable reasons, right? Those types of really horrific, pronounced examples of this violence that's being perpetuated through the use of technology. Another category that's getting a lot of attention has to do with adolescence and sexting. Yeah. People want to know about what are the youth doing, and they're sexting, and that's going to get everybody's feathers ruffled. And so there's a lot of attention at that. And a lot of this also really culturally fits in to the long overarching message that we've had throughout our history about policing women's sexuality. And so there's a lot of that framework on how does this fit in with what women are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do in terms of being sexual beings. So those main categories, the sexting in adolescence and revenge pornography and some of these other more blatant examples are getting more attention. And then there's the very pervasive experience of the term that we found in one article is cyberflashing, right? And that's what we're talking about today, where it's the unsolicited sending of a nude image. So somebody didn't ask for it, and how philosophically it can be equated that if I were to step outside, right, and someone were to flash me, that's a sexual assault and that's a criminal offense. And so how come when it shows up on my phone, is that something that's different? And again, there's so many different lived experiences around this that it can have people have different motivations for sending them and also different reactions to receiving them. And that's a lot of where another part of this conversation is that in these online forums, women are speculating about the reasons why they were sent the message. But there's not actually conversations going to the folks, and certainly women send these messages too. And there's not a lot of conversations going and saying, hey, why did you send that? Help me understand what it was you were hoping to achieve. And so if we're just speculating about that, and if we're only hearing this one voice or one main voice around what the reaction is to receiving it, there's still a lot of the conversation that's being left out.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. So what are some of the reasons that you think, what are some ideas that you have about why people might send these images? Yeah.
Lack of consequences. It's easy to block someone on some form of social media and just forget about it.
Okay.
Whereas if it was in person, being flashed, or on your phone, it's more personal. You actually have to deal with it.
So I'm gonna say that again.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Yeah. So
lack of consequences.
Yeah.
So if it's easy to just kind of like block somebody, or I mean, how many of you have had the experience of blocking someone somehow, either a phone number or social media or whatever, because they did something, not necessarily cyber flashing, but they're like, I'm just going to block them and I'm not going to deal with them.
Yeah.
And so there's not a consequence the way there is if they showed up and actually did this in person. Yeah.
What are some other ideas you have about why people might send these images? Yeah.
I feel like in my high school, it was almost like a competition, if you will, to see, especially with like my guy friends, how many people you could send it to and stuff like that. And if, people were talking about, like size and stuff like that. And so I think then nobody's emotions attached to the pictures being sent were taken into consideration. It was just how people can see it, and if I get people talking about me and bragging about me, which obviously can have like a negative impact as well if they're talking about you negatively, but still I think it was emotions were just taken out of the equation. It was just, can I get this out to as many people as I can?
Yeah, so and that really can connect too to like larger cultural messages about what it means to be a man.
Can I repeat that first?
Yes.
That there was almost a competition. Well, there was a competition among folks sending out these images to get noticed and to get it out to as many people as possible. And there were conversations around size and things like that. And so to get noticed, would that be a fair assessment? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would put that under the category that I call peacocking. That when we're peacocking and showing off our feathers, which can come back to these larger cultural messages around men and being and having conquests and wanting to kind of the way that men are supposed to get attention. Yeah. Other ideas about why? Yeah.
I feel like pictures I've received, I feel like guys do it because they're like, oh, this will turn her on to me, or make you attracted, but really it's the opposite. It's like, why are you doing that? Like, I did that. Like, it's just awkward.
Yeah. So thinking it's sexy and it's gonna be like get the mood going. Yeah.
I can only assume that sometimes they want the recipient to reciprocate to send a picture of their own.
So a hope for reciprocation.
Yeah. Okay. Over here.
I've always thought of it when I've received them as like extremely narcissistic, that you would just be delighted to see their nudity randomly on your phone.
Like, here you go. Yeah. You're welcome.
And every time I've received it, it's been from people that I know to be that narcissistic. And so it's like, I don't know if it's a personality trait, that's whatever.
There was another.
Maybe the depersonalization. It doesn't feel personal, so you can do things that you might be inhibited to do in person.
Yeah. So the comment there about depersonalization, that also really does connect with some of what the literature is saying around online harassment in general.
Cyberbullying.
Yeah, cyberbullying is that you can hide online through like trolling identities or whatever. That there is some of this like. And this, I think, connects to what you were saying earlier about things you can get away with, and do things that maybe like you wouldn't do in person with that being kind of hidden in a way.
Well, and there's a distance where you don't have to see the reaction. So you're saying like you said, oh, they think that it's going to be some sort of turn on, and not having to experience the face of like.
Yeah.
You don't see that. You don't see that at all because there's a distance. That is not there if you see that in person or you experience that in person. There's a connection that has to be processed. Like, oh, that was unpleasant for that person. Like, oh, versus, the distance. And we had someone, you wanted to say, add something else? You had your hand up a second ago, I think. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, wait again when it comes back. Yeah.
I've personally received some messages from, I don't know if I should call them sex workers, but it's almost as inviting me to either participate as a sex worker by sending me messages and pictures, or asking to be part of the service.
So an invitation in a way. So there's been the idea of an invitation for this particular exchange, like I invite you to send me something, or I invite you to get aroused, or I invite you to come and be a part of this community or this profession or this whatever you would, okay, this activity,
We had one back there. Oh, now you remembered. Okay, hold it, because we had one hand back here, I think. Did someone have a hand back in the back?
I'm in a relationship, and when I do it, it's generally like when I've ever done it, it's a form of intimacy. Like, I'm interested in you, I'm in a relationship with you, I trust you, whatever. And if I wasn't in a relationship, I suppose it'd be for similar reasons. Like, I trust you enough to be willing to do something extremely personal. And then also, it's more, if I were to do it, it'd be more along the lines of an invitation, but it's in the context of our relationship.
Yeah. Okay, so something around there about trust, like the level of trust and intimacy that it takes because it feels risky. Yeah. Okay.
Some people really just think it's fun.
Oh, for fun and humor, for a laugh.
Yeah.
Because like, hey, this is isn't this funny? Like, oh, surprise. Yeah. Yeah, okay. But
Can we call our next talk? Oh, surprise!
yeah.
Or if we have a publication, surprise!
Genitalia surprise. Yeah. Okay, so what are some idea, or what are some, maybe it's a reaction you've had, or a reaction you think that somebody would have, a variety of different reactions people might experience when being on the receiving end of an unsolicited nude image.
Do you know the website Omegle or Omegle?
Mm-mm.
Ooh, we don't know that one yet.
I know Instagram at Granny Panties, and if there's a few, yeah, but
it's a video chat site where you basically get paired up with people just anywhere randomly, based on like your interests. You'll say, "Oh, I'm into this band," and it'll connect you to someone else who wants to talk about that band. First and only time I ever used it, I was at a friend's house. I was 16, and we were going through talking to folks. It was really nice, and then we reconnected automatically to some grown man masturbating. And it was kind of a scramble. Hannah was trying to hit the disconnect key. I fell off a stool. It was, and then when the next person automatically reconnected, they came into that scene. So it was kind of just like mass panic of, oh my God, what's happening?
Okay.
So shared an experience where, what's the website called?
Omegle
or something like that, where you can connect with other folks with similar interests. And we're just having a good time with that, and then all of a sudden there's a man masturbating, and so what was your reaction to that? Like sounded like panic. Yeah, it was like somebody fell off a stool, another person was frantically trying to close things, but like, is panic a fair assessment of that?
So shock. Sounds like maybe there was some disgust. Maybe a part of you wanted to kind of like laugh, like just at, oh my gosh, did that just happen? Like, was this like maybe felt surreal? And being 16, that was, especially like, what? Yeah,
I had a like super similar experience with that same exact website. It was like a group of like.
So we have to start wondering about the purpose of this website.
It was like a group of like 5 or 6. We were all like girls. We were all like freshmen and sophomores and juniors in high school. We were at like a sleepover, and we were just like, it was on the same website, like talking to different people and all this stuff, and then like it switches you in between users, and it popped up, and it was just like a penis on the screen, and we all just like screamed and like slammed the laptop shut. We were like, what just happened? So like super similar, like exact experience.
Yeah. So a real similar experience with the same website, where all of a sudden there's a penis on the screen.
Yeah.
It's really crazy that you said that you should think about the purpose of the website, because they were around the same age group, and I wonder if they're targeting little 16-year-olds.
I'd say so, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, your reaction was shock.
Yeah. It's not because we were having good conversations with other people, and then all of a sudden we were like, "This is not what we wanted out of this." And it was horrifying.
Yeah. And those two. So somebody, like especially in the case of somebody masturbating and maybe wanting an audience for that. And this is coming back to like thinking about the purpose of it, that certainly these, like depending on the forum, throughout history, perpetrators of sexual violence find ways to find have potentially sophisticated means of finding the vulnerable population that they want to perpetrate on, whether that's persons with disabilities or elderly or young people or other people who've had life experiences that make them maybe a little bit more susceptible to somebody who's going to come in as like someone who's very charming and rescue-y or whatever. And so there's always been this element of what's the word I'm looking for? Predatory behavior, right? And so so when you're talking about these contexts, certainly people who are looking for an access point for predatory behavior are going to be using technology and finding the technology that helps connect them in that predatory way to the population or the people that they want to perpetrate on.
That's a really helpful way to think of it, because you're right. It feels like, oh, we got unlucky. We just happened to connect to this guy, because it feels random. He could have connected to anybody. But if he went into this forum knowing that that's predatory, that's not an accident. He did that on purpose.
I think what you're saying is really important. I want to make sure everyone hears it. What is it fair to say you shifted in your a little bit in your understanding of it, just via this conversation that's happening in the room.
Yeah, we've always just laughed. It was like, oh, that was a funny thing that happened, and it could have happened.
Like,
to
how in
anybody.
the world did we end up there?
So started off kind of in this, oh, wow, we ended up seeing a man masturbating. How did that happen? Oh, that's crazy. That's weird. But then shifting the narrative to, wow, that is actually potentially predatory behavior. And so that's an illustration of exactly how certain types of conversations can shift our view of our experiences, which is kind of the social justice and advocacy aspect of what we want to talk about, because we want there to be space for, I'm not just unlucky, I don't like this, and this is not okay. And you know, so around those conversations, sometimes that narrative can shift. And so I think that that's a really good illustration of that.
Yeah, as I'm just thinking about, like, so I didn't have I didn't have a cell phone until after I graduated from college, undergrad, right? So when I was growing up, we did not have this whole new world that's out there through...
Well, mine certainly did not send digital images.
Yeah, so through the interwebs.
I know that's a thing.
So if I was the age where I loved talking about My Little Pony, which was one of the things that was like back in my day, My Little Pony.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm
Care
getting on a
Bears.
site, Care Bears, right? That for me to accidentally stumble upon somebody who's exposing themselves is not so much, right? The likelihood is less that I accidentally stumbled upon it, that predator got into a group of people talking about My Little Pony because he or she had an idea of who was going to be on the other end of that, and that's who they wanted to target. And so that's how another way people can use technology to facilitate sexual violence. Yeah.
What other reactions? Oh, yeah.
Also, not even just the individuals need to be held accountable, it's the people behind these websites. Because if you know you're behind a website that, like, have y'all heard of Monkey?
No.
It's only on iPhones. Well, you connect with people instantly, and you can get their Snapchat names and things like that, but they can be doing whatever on the other side. There should be a mandatory report button on all of them, because I would go as far as removing the word potentially off of predator, because you know if your penis or your vagina is on camera, it's all intentional, every bit of it, and you know that you don't know who's going to be on the other end of it. So the people behind these websites need to take that into consideration too.
Yeah, so also talking about the accountability for places where this is happening, and the importance of that. So I'd like to just, if we can take a second to invite anybody who might be willing to share an experience where, because what we're talking about is kind of a narrative around it was not a pleasant experience, I didn't enjoy it, but you know, you
I have an example of a different...
talked about the comedian,
yeah.
But if anybody in the room wants to speak to a different experience that's not.
Yeah.
I had an experience like that with the legal site when I was younger, I think in high school. A group of friends and I were actually aware that the site was used by a lot of predators for that, and it became sort of a joke to us to go into the site and count how many times we would see that type of behavior.
Okay, so yeah, this is fascinating. So
same website, counting the times that they saw that behavior. So it's almost like taking some power back.
Right. So the way we see shifts over time in language and use of language is that there's a word that maybe is used to refer to a community, and then that word becomes taken over and used in a derogatory way against that community, and then that community might reclaim that word, right? And so there's a process that we see take place in a lot of different marginalized communities where there's a reclamation of something that was used in an oppressive or a discriminatory way. And so here we have, like, when we think about coping mechanisms, there's a little bit around coping mechanisms on kind of mitigating this experience. And so here's one where it's we're gonna like, oh, you think you can get on, like, you can kind of sneak up on us? Well, we're gonna come find you. Right? We're going to instead come find you. We're going to take some power back, or we're going to laugh. Like, we're going to use humor as a way to mitigate or cope with this experience that actually, in like the larger scheme of things, could potentially fit into something that's degrading and feels feels like an assault and is oppressive. And so it's a way, there's like, that kind of falls into some of these counterpublics. People are coming up with ways of how can we take back some power, or how can we cope with what's happening, since it is pervasive. And so the example, so this is where, like, for our research, we want to come in really open with the question of understanding these experiences, rather than coming in thinking it's only going to be this or that way. And I just, some of you, I don't know if any of you read the comedian who was recently on campus, I've forgotten her name, but it was maybe just a couple of weeks ago, and Bucktainment had sponsored her, and so I was listening to her, and in the middle of her bit, her show, she had a joke about essentially a dick pic joke, and so she was talking about it, and then afterwards, I had a very brief conversation with her. My partner, who was with me at the time, had said, "Well, she's doing some research on that." I don't remember exactly how he framed it, but and she said, "Well, I just love it, and the thing that I love about it is, like, it's somebody giving you their power, and so they've sent it to me. They've sent me this." So she's talking about receiving just just penis rape images. So when I received this image, it's like they've given me the power, and now I can, like, do whatever I want with it. And I never would have thought about it from that perspective. And then we can also kind of go into the layers of what does it mean in our culture to still have a penis being such a symbol of power, right? And for women to then have some kind of experience of, well, if you're giving this to me, then you are releasing your power to me somehow, and now I can do whatever I want with this image. So, like, really, there's so much more just in that reaction that we could dive into. But that's an example of somebody who, like, her framework on it was, I love this. Like, she was getting excited, and she seemed to think it was, like, kind of funny and energizing because it felt like some kind of that she then had some power in the situation,
which I think ties in a little bit to what he said in the back of the room, like that's like, for him, that's a vulnerable thing. Yeah. And and she's like, I've got the power now. Yeah, like, now I can make use of this thing you trusted me with. Yeah. So you had invited, are some examples of maybe some different kinds of experiences. So is there anybody else who would want to share maybe a different type of experience, including something that felt really positive, or something we haven't heard yet? Or even a hypothesis of how someone might experience it, because really kind of our question was, like, how do you think folks might experience this?
I had an experience in high school. I was probably like 14, I guess, like my freshman year. An older man in my community was sending, disgusting pictures through Facebook. And I was one of the people that had received a picture. And I think there was like 10 or 12 other girls from my high school that had gotten, same kind of photos. So I ended up having to go to the police department and file a report on this man. And he actually got, sent to jail for this, and he had to be registered as a sex offender for doing stuff like this. And it was just disgusting. Like, I felt so nasty, like being, a target of that. It was just gross.
Yeah.
So for folks in the back who might not have heard that, had an experience where an older man in the community was sending pictures via Facebook to young women.
Yeah.
Okay, young women, and then that was prosecuted, and the person had to register as a sex offender. But I think a word that really stood out for me when you were speaking was disgusting. You felt disgusting, not that it was this person's behavior, but that you, I think is what you said, felt disgusting.
Like that ick. I could see your shoulders. It was like, ugh.
I mean, obviously, I know that's wrong, and I just felt like, why would somebody do that, especially to a minor, somebody underage?
Yeah.
It just felt so gross. Like, it was just gross.
Yeah.
Violating is the word that comes to my mind.
Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot of time left. And so this is, so what questions do you have? Questions, comments, other thoughts? Yeah.
Do you have any idea? I know that the law has not kept up with emotional and psychological abuse, the way that it doesn't deal well with it yet. Do you know how the law is coming along on cyber assault?
That is really state by state. And so with most laws, you see some states who are taking a more like proactive and have some pretty clear language. And then you have other states that don't have any legislation. And then you have some that are kind of in between, but even the language needs some work because it's not, it doesn't really do a good, clear job of specifying, like, I guess what things fall into the category, you know, like how laws can be kind of worked both ways. So yeah, so it really runs the gamut of this. And I don't remember off the top of my heads. Yeah. I have multiple heads.
We do.
Yeah, our heads. Yeah,
our heads. You don't remember off the top of mine either.
I don't. Which states have the most progressive laws around it? Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah.
To piggyback off the last two things, the old man in the neighborhood, and you said it's state by state. You can tell that a lot of these states haven't made very much progress at all, because the fact that it's good that he had to register as a sex offender, but the fact that he did have to register as a sex offender, it's just, you know, he's getting out and he can't live in certain areas and things like that. It's not taken as seriously as it should be, although it is taken seriously by those of us, but we can't do anything about it, you know, so I feel like,
yeah, and it falls under the larger problematic cultural narrative around sexual violence in general that also makes it very hard to prosecute sexual assault. And certainly with the recent Me Too movement and Time's Up movement, you know, we've seen this dialogue come into our culture in a new way, and I think a very exciting and empowering way. And yet, there's like that's already like where where's the momentum? How far did the momentum get us? And so yeah, like with was the image consensual or was somebody asking for it? I mean, we're seeing all of the same type of possible victim blaming stuff play out in the same way it does on in person. Assaults, yeah.
So how would you recommend helping somebody through situations like this? Because one of my really close friends, she was preyed upon by like the same guy multiple times. She reported it, but the police situation took way too long, and so she just didn't follow through with pressing any charges and stuff like that. And I can see now how she almost internalizes that, and now she dates guys that don't treat her the way she should be treated. So how can I, like, as a friend, if, you know, it happens to other friends or something like that, how do you help somebody through that to see, hey, like, you're still worthy of being treated well, and you still have your worth, and you still, because her innocence was almost stolen from her. So how do you...
question is, how do you help a friend who's experienced this or dealt with this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I just love hearing you too, like, being like how much you want to be a supportive friend and someone who wants to empower by showing, you know, your friend their worth. I can answer, but I
have some reactions.
I do too, and I feel like I've been talking a lot, so
I'll start and you can finish. And you know, we've got like 2 whole minutes.
Okay.
So the first thing I would say, there are 2 things that I would say. I'm really not good at being brief. The first thing is to validate your friend's experience, whatever that is, even if it's not the experience that you would have. And that's around that idea of, like, let's say it would not be upsetting to you to receive a dick pic, but your friend is very upset. Then validate your friend's experience. That is very upsetting to you. You feel afraid, you feel violated, you feel all of those things, you know, whatever that is. So validate your friend's experience. The second thing that I would say is, relieve yourself from the role of being someone's therapist. I refer, like, even if it means walking that person to the counseling center or saying, I'll sit in the waiting room with you, but I really think that this is what you need to do for yourself. It sucks. The legal system sucks around this. I used to work with child sexual abuse and sexual assault survivors, and it hardly ever made it to court for those exact reasons. You know, you can't heal and move on when the case takes 4.5 years. And so it's just, the system sucks. And so validating that too, like, the system sucks. and countering the narrative that if you decided not to pursue that in that system, that you were somehow screwed up. Like, you got to do what you got to do. And so validating that too, because I think there's a narrative around that like you have an obligation to follow that through. And you know what? If that doesn't work for you, that doesn't work for you. And so whatever that person's experience is, validating that.
Those are my top two.
Look at that.
Yeah.
This is why we work well together.
Yeah. The things I would add to that would be that there are a lot of messages around. I'm going to talk again about in a gender binary term, and not that I'm wanting to acknowledge that I'm going to talk about things in a gender binary while disagreeing with the binary. So women get a lot of message around how to keep ourselves safe. I'm saying ours, I identify as cisgender female. And so I've received a lot of messages about how I am supposed to protect my chastity and how I am supposed to keep myself safe. And I'm supposed to have the keychain that has the cat ears. And I'm supposed to make sure that I walk in lighted areas.
I refer to it as running while female. I'm a runner, so running while female.
Yeah, and I'm supposed to make sure I have my keys out and that I don't wear my hair like this because this can be used against me. And that I make sure that I'm looking assertively when I'm walking around.
And don't dress in anything that
this is probably going to be too much exposed. So we get a lot of messages around how we're supposed to keep ourselves safe. And when something goes wrong, then we didn't do a good enough job of keeping ourselves safe. So one of the things that I'm thinking in terms of, as you're talking about, how do we navigate that with our friendships? Because on the one hand, I might want to do some of those things to help me feel safe, especially if I'm not feeling safe. While at the same time being angry about the system that I'm having to exist within, right? That if I go outside of the system, then it might come back on me in some way, and so it feels really hard to navigate that. So one of the things that you might with your friends and among your people. Like your friendship groups is what I'm getting at, like whoever you're having these conversations with, to be able to talk about both sides of that, and to talk about like how maybe there are times where your friend isn't feeling safe and wants to do some of these things, and how can we have a balanced conversation around, let's do the things that we need to keep us safe, while also remembering that if somebody violates my body, they violated my body. That maybe I tried to do things to keep myself safe, but I am not in control of their behavior, and they did the wrong thing there. And so that we can engage in some things that help feel us safe while not engaging in victim blaming conversations, and not then internalizing that I deserve this, I asked for it, I didn't do a good enough job of protecting myself, that type of stuff.
And the same can be said for these kinds of images and things that folks are receiving.
Right, yeah.
Oh, we're 3 minutes over.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you so
much
much
for the conversation. Thank you.